I set the porcelain cup on the tray as carefully as if it were crystal. Steam curled in the dim light of my Ohio kitchen, carrying the familiar fragrance of chamomile and honey. I told myself it was just tea, nothing more. A mother in law's small gesture to ease the quiet distance that had grown between us. I wanted to believe that if I offered warmth, perhaps warmth would return. Before I carry on, let me pause a moment. This is just the beginning of my story. Tell me, where are you watching from today? Yet, even as I stirred, a heaviness pressed inside me. My daughter in law's smile lingered too long at the edges, tight and unreadable. She had asked me to drink first, her voice softer than usual but urgent, insistent. It was such a simple request. Sip now, mother. Don't let it get cold. And that was when I felt it. The unease, the flicker of betrayal that turned something as ordinary as tea into the start of everything I never expected. So let's get into what happened. Because the truth didn't arrive all at once. It came slowly, the way frost creeps across a window in the deep of winter. At first, I thought it was nothing more than my imagination, the kind of thoughts a woman gets when she feels her presence shrinking inside her own family. I carried the tray from the kitchen into the living room where she was waiting. My daughter-in-law looked up briefly from her phone, her expression unreadable. She gestured toward the couch and I set the tea down. The warmth of the cup still pressed against my palm, a reminder of all the evenings when tea had meant conversation, comfort, and love in my younger days. Back then, in the home I shared with my husband, a pot of tea could fix almost anything. He'd come home tired from the factory, I'd pour him a cup, and for a moment the world softened. But with her, it was different. When I handed over that cup, I felt a small shiver of distance that no amount of honey could sweeten. She urged me to sip first, her voice calm but her eyes sharp, watching every movement of my hand. I smiled politely, though inside me a quiet voice began to whisper. Why so insistent? Why now? I didn't answer that question in the moment. Instead, I took the cup and let it rest on my lap, my fingers circling the porcelain as if stalling. I told myself I was tired, that maybe I was reading too much into things. Women like me, we were raised to swallow doubt along with our pride, to tell ourselves it wasn't worth stirring trouble. My generation believed in keeping peace, even if it meant losing a piece of ourselves in the process. But the doubt followed me. It followed me back to my room that night as I lay awake in the silence of the house. My son was in the other room, his life busy with work and distractions. He rarely noticed the undercurrents, and I couldn't blame him. Men often don't see what runs beneath the surface. It is the women who feel the sharpness of silence, the changes in tone, the things left unsaid. I thought back to the first time I ever felt unwelcome in my own home. It was subtle, almost too small to matter. My daughter-in-law had rearranged the pantry, moving my spices to the top shelf where I could hardly reach. When I mentioned it, she laughed lightly and said it was just for convenience. But convenience for whom? It left me standing on my tiptoes, clutching the edge of the shelf like a stranger in a place that had once been mine. That night, lying in bed, I remembered that pantry. I remembered the first time she took over the kitchen completely, brushing me aside as though I were only in the way. She told my son she wanted to take care of things, but what she meant was she wanted control. Control of the meals, control of the schedules, and, as I was beginning to suspect, control of me. The next morning, I found myself watching her movements more closely. She poured tea again, this time saying she wanted to prepare it for me since I had been up late. Her smile seemed warm enough, but there was something rehearsed in it, as though she had practiced kindness without meaning it. I let the tea sit beside me untouched, telling her I would drink later. She didn't push, but I noticed how her eyes flicked to the cup again and again, as if she were waiting for a moment I didn't yet understand. In the quiet hours of that day, I thought back on my own mother. She had raised me with little more than grit and faith, teaching me that trust was the one thing you never tampered with. Once broken, it could never be rebuilt the same. She had been a woman of simple means but unshakable strength, and she taught me to pay attention to the smallest of details, the way a hand trembles, the way a voice strains. Sitting there in that living room, my mother's voice echoed in my mind, warning me not to ignore what I could plainly see. Still, I wasn't ready to believe betrayal lived inside my walls. I told myself it was tension, that maybe she was only trying to help in her own clumsy way. I told myself that maybe I was overthinking, that loneliness had sharpened my imagination. But the doubt remained, stubborn as a stone in my shoe. As the week went on, I noticed how often she appeared with tea. Morning, afternoon, evening. Sometimes with herbs I hadn't seen her buy. Sometimes with a sweetness that lingered oddly on my tongue. And each time she urged me to drink while it was hot. Each time her smile never quite reached her eyes. I remembered something then. An evening years ago when my husband had been ill. I had brewed tea with honey and ginger, urging him to sip. But that was different. That had been love, real and raw. He had known it in the way I stayed by his side, in the way I tasted from the same cup. Care is never one-sided. Care is shared. And that was what struck me most. My daughter-in-law never touched the tea she gave me. Not once. One night, curiosity overcame me. I waited until she left the room, then poured the tea she had brought into a small glass jar I kept for preserves. I told myself it was foolish, that I'd laugh at the memory one day. But my hands trembled as I sealed the lid and tucked it away in the back of my dresser. A quiet precaution. A secret I told no one. Because deep down, I had begun to understand. Something was wrong. Something I couldn't yet name, but could no longer ignore. Looking back, I realized that distrust doesn't come out of nowhere. It grows in the cracks left by years of being taken for granted. I thought about this often after that week of tea and silence, and my mind wandered to the years when I had been the one carrying the weight of a family on my back. When I first married, my husband and I had next to nothing. We rented a small one-bedroom apartment above a grocery store in a quiet Ohio town. The walls were thin, the winters were cold, and the nights seemed endless, but we had determination. He worked long shifts at the factory, and I took whatever jobs I could find, cleaning houses, sewing clothes, even babysitting children who weren't mine. Every penny went into building something better for our future. I gave up more than I could count. Dreams of finishing school, dreams of traveling, even simple dreams of sitting with a book in the evening instead of scrubbing someone else's floors. But I never resented it, because I believed it mattered. I believed sacrifice was the way mothers laid the foundation for their children's lives. When my son was born, I thought I had been handed proof that all the long hours and missed meals were worth it. He was small, with dark hair like his father and eyes that seemed to hold both mischief and kindness. I promised myself that no matter what I had to endure, he would never go without. I wanted him to stand taller than I ever could, to live a life that wasn't shackled to survival. And for many years, I held on to that promise. I cooked meals from scratch, stretched every dollar, and worked into the night sewing clothes for neighbors just to afford his school supplies. When he was sick, I stayed awake by his bedside, whispering quiet prayers into the darkness. I did everything a mother could do, and sometimes more. So, years later, when I found myself sitting in a living room where my daughter-in-law's smile felt sharper than kindness, I couldn't help but wonder, was this what it all led to? After a lifetime of giving, was I now meant to sit quietly, drink what was handed to me, and ask no questions? The thought haunted me. I remembered one evening when my husband came home with a look of worry across his face. The factory had cut hours and the bills were piling up. I had gone into the kitchen and brewed him tea, slipping an extra spoonful of sugar because I knew it helped ease the tiredness in his bones. We didn't have much, but he always trusted me. Trust was the glue of our marriage, the silent bond that told him whatever I handed him was safe. That memory clashed with the present, where I couldn't even lift a cup to my lips without hesitation. I thought, too, of the years after my husband passed. Grief had hollowed me, but I stood steady because my son needed me. I had sold what little jewelry I had left, poured it into his college fund, and told myself it was an investment in hope. I remember ironing his shirt the night before he left, my hands trembling as if pressing fabric could somehow press away my fears. That's what mothers do. We give even when it hurts, even when no one remembers the cost. Now, sitting in a house where my place felt smaller each day, I couldn't ignore how easily my daughter-in-law dismissed me. She managed the household, and I let her. She took control of decisions, and I stayed quiet. But when the tea kept appearing, when the insistence grew stronger, I began to feel the truth pressing in. She didn't want me as part of this family. She wanted me silent, subdued, easier to handle. It wasn't just the tea, it was the little things. She reminded me not to lock the door at night because she held the master key. She suggested I shouldn't walk alone to the store, saying it was too much for me. She corrected me in front of my son about matters that didn't need correcting. Each small act chipped away at me, and yet I held my tongue, hoping time would smooth over the edges. But time didn't soften her. It only made her bolder. And I kept thinking about the sacrifices that had brought me here. I thought about the girl who once scrubbed floors until her hands cracked just to buy her son a pair of shoes. I thought about the nights I worked by candlelight, stitching dresses I could never wear just to pay for his books. That girl, that woman, would never have believed that one day the very family she built her life around would try to make her small. And yet, here I was, holding jars of untouched tea in the back of my dresser, like they were evidence of something I didn't dare name aloud. One evening, when I was alone, I sat by the window and looked out at the Ohio sky. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the cicadas buzzed in the trees. I remembered my mother telling me that women must never forget their own strength, even when the world tries to take it from them. I whispered those words to myself, a reminder that I had weathered storms before and could weather this one too. Still, the question lingered in my chest, heavy and unresolved. Why would she want me quiet? Why would she want me weak? And what exactly was in that tea? The change didn't happen overnight. It came in small waves, moments so ordinary that anyone else might have missed them. But when you've lived long enough, you learn that the truth often hides in plain sight, waiting for someone willing to see it. At first, I told myself it was habit. That was why she kept bringing me tea. But habit has a rhythm, a casualness. Her actions didn't feel casual. There was always a sharpness to them, a sense of watching me closely. She never offered tea to anyone else in the house, only me. That alone made me stop and think. It became clearer when I began noticing the timing. She never brought the tea when my son was home early. It was always when the two of us were alone in the house. Mornings after he left for work, evenings when he ran errands. Always then, always with the same soft insistence. One evening, she placed the cup in front of me and said, "This will help you sleep better. You've been restless." Her voice sounded almost kind, but there was something in the way her eyes held mine that made my stomach tighten. How would she know whether I was restless? She never asked, and I had never said a word about lying awake at night. That was when I began to test her. Small things at first. I would let the tea sit untouched, saying I wanted it to cool. Hours later, I would forget it, the cup still full on the table. Each time she seemed disappointed. Her smile faltered for a second, though she recovered quickly, offering excuses. Oh, well, maybe tomorrow. But her eyes told another story. The more I delayed, the more insistent she became. One afternoon she said, "Mother, you really should drink it while it's warm. It doesn't help once it's cold." She didn't look at me when she said it, her voice quick, like she was repeating a line she had rehearsed. That moment stayed with me. I thought about my son. I wondered if he noticed anything at all, if he ever questioned why I was drinking cup after cup. But he was caught up in his job, his deadlines, his endless calls. He trusted his wife to manage the home, and maybe that was the mistake. He trusted too easily, just as I had once trusted without question. I started paying attention to the taste. At first it was subtle, a faint bitterness under the honey. Then on certain days the flavor seemed stronger, as if something had been added. I asked once what kind of herbs she was using, and she rattled off names so quickly I barely caught them. Chamomile, valerian root, passion flower, her tone sharp, as though daring me to challenge her. I nodded, but unease stayed lodged in my chest. The pantry told me another story. When I searched through it one morning, I noticed jars tucked behind the flour, unfamiliar labels I hadn't bought. Some herbs were written in Latin, the kind of thing you wouldn't find at an ordinary store. I didn't dare ask where she had gotten them. Instead, I memorized the names, whispering them to myself in case I needed them later. The house began to feel different. I found myself checking doors twice, keeping my room locked when I was alone. I began writing small notes to myself, just in case something ever happened, reminders of what I'd seen, what I'd tasted. I hid them in my drawer alongside the jars of untouched tea. It felt strange, almost paranoid, but every instinct in me said it was necessary. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. She brought me tea as usual, but this time, when she set it down, her hand lingered on the cup. "Drink it now," she said, her voice firm, not soft. It wasn't a suggestion anymore, it was an order. My heart thudded in my chest, but I forced a smile and lifted the cup. I tilted it just enough so the liquid touched my lips, but I didn't swallow. Instead, I excused myself to the kitchen, pretending I wanted a napkin. There, with her eyes off me, I tipped the tea into the sink and rinsed the cup. When I returned, she looked at me strangely, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Did you finish it?" she asked. I nodded. Her shoulders loosened and she smiled again, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. That was when I knew. Whatever was in that cup, it mattered to her that I drank it. Too much. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake in the darkness, hearing the faint hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old wooden beams above me. My mind raced through every moment. The pantry jars, her sharp insistence, the bitterness beneath the honey. It all pieced together into a picture I didn't want to see. She wasn't caring for me. She was controlling me, or trying to. I remembered something my husband once told me. Pay attention to what people do when they think no one notices. He had said it about factory supervisors who cut corners, but now it applied here in my own home. And I had noticed. The next morning, when she brought me tea again, I smiled, thanked her, and set it aside. She waited longer this time, sitting across from me, her phone in her hand but her eyes flicking up every few seconds. I let the cup sit there, the steam curling into the air until it cooled completely. Finally, I pushed it away. She frowned. "You don't want it?" "I'll have some later," I said. Her jaw tightened and she stood quickly, carrying the cup back into the kitchen. I listened as the water splashed into the sink, her movements sharp, almost angry. My suspicion hardened into certainty. From that day forward, I knew I had to be careful. Every interaction was a test, every cup of tea a choice between silence and survival. The moment I realized I couldn't keep pretending came quietly. No shouting, no scene, just the steady truth building in my chest. I had avoided enough cups, stored away enough jars, and made enough excuses. If I wanted peace of mind, I needed to know for certain. So I started paying closer attention to the preparation itself. I listened for the clink of the spoon, the rhythm of her stirring, the way she guarded the cup as if it were something private. I noticed she never sipped from the same pot. She would brew one cup, just for me, as though the rest of the family didn't matter. That alone felt wrong. Tea was supposed to be shared, not served like medicine. One morning, I waited until she went to the store, then opened the pantry again. I lined up the jars I'd memorized. Strange. Names written on labels, some with smudges as though they had been handled in a hurry. I unscrewed one and sniffed. The smell was sharp, nothing like the herbs I had used all my life. I didn't recognize it. My mother had taught me about chamomile, mint, lavender, all simple, safe. This wasn't any of those. I poured a pinch into my hand, studying the dried leaves and powdery fragments. A thought crossed my mind, one I tried to shake away. What if this was meant to weaken me, to make me easier to manage, easier to silence? The thought left a bitter taste in my mouth even before I put anything near my lips. I knew I couldn't taste it myself. That would be foolish. Instead, I decided to keep samples. just as I had with the tea in the jar. I wrapped small portions of the herbs in tissue and hid them in my dresser. My hands shook as I folded the paper, not from age, but from the weight of knowing I was no longer imagining things. That evening, she returned with another cup. "This will calm your nerves," she said, setting it on the table with a smile that looked polished like a mask. I thanked her, let it sit, then excused myself. In the kitchen, I poured most of it into the same jar with the others. My heart pounded the whole time, as though she might walk in and catch me. But she didn't. When I returned, I lifted the cup to my lips and let the last sip touch my tongue. Just enough to play along, it tasted off. Bitter, with a strange aftertaste that lingered too long. I swallowed and forced myself not to grimace. She watched me closely, her eyes soft but sharp, waiting. I set the empty cup down, and she finally looked satisfied. That night, I felt dizzy. My head ached, my body heavy. I told myself it was exhaustion, but deep down I knew better. Whatever she had slipped into that tea had found its way inside me. I didn't sleep well, waking again and again, my chest tight, my thoughts foggy. The next morning, the heaviness stayed. I sat by the window staring at the jar hidden in my dresser. I couldn't keep this to myself forever. I needed proof, not just suspicion. I thought about calling a doctor or even the police, but shame held me back. What if they didn't believe me? What if they called it paranoia, an old woman's fear? I had seen too many stories where women like me were dismissed, told we were exaggerating. Still, the evidence grew. Each cup, each uneasy night, each time she urged me to drink faster. It all stacked up like bricks building a wall I could no longer ignore. I knew I had to protect myself. The hardest part was looking at my son. He was so busy, his days filled with work and meetings. When he asked me how things were at home, I smiled and said fine. But inside, I screamed at myself for staying silent. He trusted her completely. He would never imagine that his wife might mean harm to his own mother. I didn't want to shatter that trust, not yet. But I couldn't stop thinking about my past sacrifices. The shoes I had bought him with blistered hands, the books I had paid for with nights of labor. All those years spent protecting him, only to sit now in a house where I needed to protect myself. The irony cut deep. The next week, I avoided the tea entirely. I claimed I had a sore throat, that plain water was easier. Her smile slipped for a moment, but she didn't argue. Instead, she placed the cup on the table anyway, as though daring me to change my mind. I let it sit there until it cooled, then carried it to my room. Once again, I poured it into the jar. By now, I had 3 jars hidden away, each one a piece of my unspoken truth. I began noticing how she hovered near me afterward, asking if I felt tired, if I wanted to rest. It was too much to be coincidence. She was waiting for me to become weak, to surrender. And in those moments, a different kind of strength rose in me, quiet but firm. The kind of strength my mother had taught me, the kind that carried me through years of hardship. I decided I would not be silent much longer because now I wasn't only suspicious. I was certain. By then, silence wasn't safety anymore. It was a plan that served her. Each day I kept quiet gave her more space to tighten her control. I realized I had to act, not just wonder. The jars hidden in my dresser weren't enough. They were proof, yes, but proof locked away in a place no one else could see. So I began to think about how to bring the truth into the open. One idea stayed with me. If she wanted me to drink, then perhaps one day she should drink too. It sounded bold, even reckless. But I couldn't keep playing the part of a polite guest in my own home. The chance came sooner than I expected. At dinner one evening, she placed a steaming cup beside my plate before I even sat down. "It will help you digest," she said, her tone smooth, practiced. My son sat across the table, tired from work, flipping through his phone. I looked at the cup, then back at her, and something in me snapped. "Why don't you join me tonight?" I asked, my voice calm. "It would be nice to share." She froze. Only for a second, but I caught it. Her smile slipped before returning, brittle at the edges. Oh no, Mother. This is just for you. I don't need it. I pushed the cup toward her, steady hands betraying none of the storm inside me. Then it won't hurt. Her eyes flicked to my son, then back to me. She let out a soft laugh as though I'd suggested something silly, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Maybe later, she murmured and slid the cup back toward me. My son looked up then, confusion in his eyes. What's going on? I met his gaze. My heart hammered, but I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. I don't think this tea is what it's supposed to be. The room went still. My son frowned, glancing between us. What are you talking about? I took a breath, steadying myself. For weeks, she's been pressing me to drink. Always when you're not home. Always with herbs I never asked for, and every time I've kept what she gave me. I have jars in my room. Proof. Her face paled. That's ridiculous, she snapped, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. You're imagining things. But I didn't back down. I turned to my son. I felt it in my body, the heaviness, the fog. You know I've never hidden things from you. Why would I start now? For the first time, doubt crossed his face. He set down his phone, leaning forward. Do you really have proof? I nodded. In my dresser. I've kept every cup I didn't drink. If you don't believe me, have someone test them. The silence that followed stretched tight. My daughter-in-law's hands clenched in her lap, her smile gone completely now. She opened her mouth, but no words came. My son's eyes searched hers, then mine. He looked torn, caught between loyalty and suspicion. Finally, he stood. Show me, he said. We walked together to my room. I opened the drawer, pulling out the jars one by one, setting them on the dresser like fragile trophies. The liquid inside had grown cloudy over time, but it was there. Every careful act of resistance lined up in glass. He stared at them, then back at me. You really kept all this? I had to, I whispered. Because I knew if I spoke without proof, no one would believe me. Behind us, she appeared in the doorway, her voice rising. This is insane. You're letting her twist your mind. But my son didn't answer right away. He picked up one jar, studying it, then set it back down. His face hardened in a way I hadn't seen before. He looked at her with something colder than doubt. He looked at her as though seeing her clearly for the first time. That night didn't end with shouting, though her protests grew louder and his questions sharper. For me, the battle wasn't in their words. The victory was in finally speaking, in breaking the silence that had threatened to bury me. And I knew then that I could no longer go back. The house felt heavier after that night, as if every wall had soaked in the tension. My son didn't speak much at breakfast the next morning. He sat with his coffee, staring at the jars I had lined up on the counter. He hadn't sent them anywhere yet, hadn't called anyone, but I could tell by the way his jaw tightened that his mind was racing. She moved through the kitchen like nothing had happened, humming lightly, her footsteps sharp against the tile. She poured juice, fried eggs, laid out bread as though this was just another morning. But when she placed a glass in front of me, I noticed her hand shake for the first time. Only for a second, but I caught it. No tea appeared that day. Instead, she tried a different strategy. She became overly attentive, asking if I wanted to rest, if I needed errands done, if I felt unwell. Her voice carried a forced sweetness, but the undercurrent was fear. She knew the jars in my son's hands were stronger than any denial. By evening, my son finally spoke. We need to test them. His voice was flat, steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm underneath. Her response was quick. That's absurd. Do you know how much money that would cost? It's just tea, nothing more. She's exaggerating. But he didn't look at her. He looked at me. I'll figure it out, he said, his tone quiet but final. For the first time, I saw panic flicker across her face. She excused herself, retreating to the bedroom. The door closed with a slam. I sat in silence, unsure whether to feel relief or sorrow. This was my family unraveling before my eyes, not in shouts or broken dishes, but in truths that could no longer be hidden. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, hearing muffled whispers from their room. His voice was low, hers higher, strained. Though I couldn't make out the words, the tone was clear. She was trying to explain, to cover, to twist. He wasn't buying it anymore. The next morning, he left early, jars tucked in a paper bag. He didn't tell me where he was going, but I didn't need him to. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange calm. Whatever the results showed, I had spoken, and he had listened. That was enough. When he returned that evening, his face was pale. He set the bag down without a word. She hovered behind him, her arms crossed, eyes red. Finally, he said, "There's something in it." The air in the room thickened. He explained the basics: sedatives, mild but strong enough to cause dizziness, fatigue, confusion if taken regularly. Nothing lethal, but enough to dull me. Enough to make me dependent. Her voice broke the silence. I was only trying to help her sleep. She's been restless. I read online that herbs could ease her nerves. It wasn't meant to hurt her. But her words rang hollow. I thought back to every forced sip, every sharp insistence, every night of fog. Helping me sleep or keeping me quiet? My son didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply looked at her, his face carved with disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me?" She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered. The distance between them was suddenly visible, like a fault line that had been there all along, only now exposed. For me, the betrayal wasn't just in what she had done. It was in the way she looked at me even now, as if I were the problem, as if speaking the truth made me ungrateful. That hurt more than the tea ever could. I realized then that I had a choice. I could let this define me, let myself become the victim she wanted me to be, or I could take back what little control I still had. That night, I packed a small bag. Not to leave forever, not yet, but to remind myself that I wasn't trapped. I gathered my papers, my savings book, the letters my husband had left me. I tucked them away safely where no one could touch them. When my son noticed, he asked quietly, "What are you doing?" "Making sure I don't lose myself," I said. He didn't argue. He only nodded, his eyes heavy with understanding. The days that followed were cold, silent. She stopped making tea, stopped speaking to me unless my son was in the room. She moved around the house with clipped steps, her face set like stone. But she couldn't erase what had been uncovered. And though the pain of it pressed on me, there was also relief. The truth was out. The jars had spoken louder than my silence ever could. I knew the hardest part was still to come. Decisions would need to be made, trust would need to be rebuilt, or broken entirely, but one thing was certain. I would not be quiet again. The days after the truth came out felt like living in a house that no longer belonged to any of us. Every sound seemed louder. The scrape of a chair, the shutting of a door, the clatter of dishes in the sink. We were 3 people under the same roof, but the silence between us was wider than the Ohio River in spring. My son tried to balance it at first. He wanted peace, wanted to believe his wife's excuses, but the test results didn't lie. The jars didn't lie. And neither did the heaviness that had lived in my body for weeks. Still, he struggled with the reality that the woman he trusted most had betrayed his mother. I could see it in his eyes each night at the dinner table, his loyalty split clean in half. She tried to carry on, but her movements were stiff, her words clipped. She stopped leaving tea for me, but the absence of it was its own confession. She no longer looked me in the eye. When she spoke, it was through him, as though I had vanished. I thought I would feel victorious, but instead I felt tired. The kind of tired that comes from years of giving, only to realize you still have to fight for your right to be seen. The jars had saved me, yes, but the truth had cost us all something. One evening, my son asked me to sit with him. His voice was quieter than usual, almost boyish again. "What do you want to do, Mom?" The question startled me. For so long, my choices had been ignored. brushed aside, decided for me. Now, sitting there with his eyes searching mine, I realized the answer mattered. I want to live, I said simply. Not just exist in a corner of this house. I've spent my whole life giving, holding everything together. I won't spend what's left of it being managed, silenced, or treated like I don't matter. His throat worked as he swallowed hard and he nodded. Then we'll make changes. The changes didn't come overnight. They never do. But they came. I opened a new account in my own name, moving what savings I had managed to hold on to. My son helped me, his face red with shame that he hadn't thought of it sooner. I met with a lawyer quietly to make sure my will and deeds were in order. For the first time, I put things in writing, not for anyone else, but for me. She watched it all unfold with cold silence. At first, she tried to argue, telling my son I was overreacting, that I had turned paranoid. But the more I spoke clearly, the less room she had to twist things. She knew her hold was slipping. There was one last moment I'll never forget. She came into my room late one afternoon when my son was at work. She stood by the dresser, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. "You've ruined everything," she said quietly. I looked at her, steady, without flinching. "No," I replied. "You ruined it yourself." Her jaw clenched, but she didn't answer. She turned and left the room, her footsteps quick down the hall. That was the last time she tried to confront me directly. Weeks later, she packed a bag and left for her mother's house. My son told me she needed time to think, but I knew the truth. Time wasn't what she needed. She needed control. And without it, she had no place here. The house was quieter after she left. Still heavy, but in a different way. My son and I began to talk again, really talk, for the first time in years. He asked me about my childhood, about the sacrifices I had made, about his father. He said he wished he had listened sooner. I told him regret was useless, that what mattered was listening now. And in those moments, I felt something return. Not joy, not yet, but dignity. The simple right to sit at my own table and be heard. The right to decide whether I would drink tea or water or nothing at all. It wasn't the ending I had dreamed of years ago when I imagined a warm family with no shadows between us, but it was real. And it was mine. Sometimes I sit by the window still, watching the seasons change over Ohio fields. I think of the jars I hid, lined up like soldiers in a quiet war. Proof of both betrayal and survival. Proof that even in silence I had been strong enough to act. I no longer keep jars in my dresser. I no longer need them. Because the greatest proof I carry is within me. The knowledge that I did not let myself be erased. And for the first time in a long while, I believe that is enough. If my journey of finding strength in the face of betrayal touched you, you'll want to see what happened when another mother uncovered a hidden truth disguised as care. Follow the link and witness how one quiet discovery changed everything she thought she knew about family and trust.